We're continuing in our introduction to Kodshim and specifically to the Avodah Yom Kippurim. And we were discussing before Pesach the mitzvah of Hazas Dam of the par. So it means that after the Aktores, they shechted the par shel Kohen Gadol. And actually, in the Seder Advarim, there was, number one, shchita of the par. Number two, there was haktores. Number three, they were molich the dama par into the Kodesh Kodshim. And there the Kohen Gadol stood between the badim, right, the poles that were attached to the sides of the Aron. And then he dips his right hand into the dam, and he does 8 hazos, achas lemala, v'sheva lemata, and he basically sprinkles the dam into the avir, the airspace of Bein Abadim. Now, we mentioned last time, and it deserves repetition, that even though in Bayis Sheni there was no Aron, but nevertheless, they knew the Makom Aron, and they knew exactly where the Bein Abadim was. And it doesn't matter, l'chatchila, it seems that the ideal Hazah would reach the Dam, would reach what's called the Kapores, but even if the dam does not reach the kapparos, but rather falls on the ground, that's also fine. Now, every time the Kohen Gadol did a hazah, he would finish the hazah and then dip his fingers again into the dam. And he dipped his fingers time after time after time. Achas lamala, sheva lamata. And the Gemara, the Mishnah actually says, Lo haya miskaven lahazos lo lamala lamata el kimatzlif. And this we're familiar from the Avodah Yom Kippur that we recite in the Machzor for Yom Kippur. And the Rishonim say that what is kimatzlif? That the hazah lemala hayamaze kishegav yodo klape mata. In other words, he would turn his hand over such that the gav of his yad, which I believe is the outer part of the hand as opposed to the kaf hayad, and the gav hayad is towards the bottom. So the hazah went up in that direction. Now, the gav of a yad is turned towards the top in order to do the hazos lamata. So it's always a matzlif, whether he's a matzlif lamala for the achas lamala, or he's a matzlif lamata for the other 7 hazos. Now, what does lamala mean? Does lamala mean that it has to be directed lamala mea kapores, above the height of the kapores? Lo haya machavin bazo shalamala shetei me'ala kapores b'dafka. There was no requirement that it had to go all the way up on top. It was towards the top. And loya machavein bazos shalamato shiu betachtas akaporis bedafka. Right, he didn't have to aim the hazah such that it reached the level below the kaporis. But there are Rishonim who are of the opinion that when he did the 7 hazos lamata, the ones that were in the downward motion, then he would gradually go lower and lower and lower. In other words, every time that he sprinkled the dam, he would try to get it consecutively lower towards the ground. Shemagia azos l'ritzpa hayu b'shura zu tachas zu. Now there's another halach. Tzarech hakohen gadol sheyimna minyan hazos b'piv. He has to count the hazos one after the other in number, verbally. One separate hazah, counting for the top hazah, the first hazah, which was lamala, and now he has to start a brand new counting for the hazos lamata. Hence, it's called achas lamala and sheva lamata. Now, kshemona hazos lamata, when he's counting the hazos that are on the bottom direction, as we said before, the matzlif going down, then he counts them together with the hazol lamala. So even though they're two separate hazos, he never drops the minion of the lamala. He always has to integrate the sphera of lamala with the lamata. So therefore he says, acha, when he gets to, let's say, the first lamata, he'll say, achas lamala v'achas lamata. And once again, this is what we're familiar with from the Seder Avodah Musaf Yom Kippur. Achas v'achas, achas v'shtayim, achas v'sholosh, etc. Now, there's one interesting opinion that we're not so familiar with, but the Gemara has an opinion that he should leave the count of the achas lamala for the end, meaning, obviously, when he does the first of the 8 hazos, then he counts achas. But when he's ready for the hazos subsequent to the first, meaning the lamata, he counts achas, and then he says the achas lamala till he gets sheva lamata, and achas lamala. Now, everything about the hazah and all its details are what we call Torah Shebal Peh. In the Torah Shebechsav, in the parsha of the Soya Mishtalech, the Torah just says Vehiza Oso Ala Kapores in Achrimos. So we don't see in the pasuk anything about these multiple hazos. But the Gemara says the following. On the one hand, it says Vehiza Oso in the singular, and that implies one. And then it says ala kapores. Ala kapores means lamala, in the airspace going towards the top. And that's achas, that's osa. But then the Torah says, "V'lifnei kapores yazeh sheva pa'omim min adam be'etzbo." And here the Torah is requiring 7 hazos with his etzba, and how they differ than the first hazah. The answer is the first hazah says ala kaporis, which means lamala. And therefore, by process of elimination, if the Torah is adding more hazos, in order to differentiate those from the achas lamala, it's going to have to be lamat. And that's sheva pa'omim betzbo. Now, we have hazos in 2 cases on Yom Kippur. Number 1, the par, and number 2, the sa'ir. In both cases, we need achas lamala and sheva lamat. Now, we said before that even though the Torah says ala kaporis, it doesn't mean that the dam has to reach the kaporis. It has to be aimed towards the kaporis, lamala. And this too is derived from Psukim. Because in the Sa'ir, when the Torah talks about the and the Torah is outspoken about the chiyuv hazos lamata, there it says that you need these 7 hazos, and it says v'lifnei hakaporos. Now, when we're talking about the soyer, this is what we call einot tzricha. Lo ye'omer b'sar hazos elu klal v'yilmod soyer min hapar. Why did the Torah have to spell out the chiyuv hazah in the case of soyer? We can derive it from par. Just like we learned from par the minyan hazos, so too this hekesh is going to give us, in the case of soyer, the chovas hazah. So why did the Torah have to go out of its way in the case of soyer to write that which seems to be redundant, and it says lifnei kaporos? Elo shenemru azos elu k'dei lahakish al kaporos ha'amur kodem lifnei kaporos eliach ma lifnei kaporos eino el al kaporos atzma is af al hakapores eino al hakapores atzma. This is all a sugya on Daf Nun He. Now, until now we spoke about the par. Now we're ready to the soy. So we have hazos damas soyer, and that's also bein habadim. So it means after he finishes up the avodah par and all the hazos, now he shechts the soyer, and we're talking about the soyer that's lashem as opposed to the soyer that's lazozel. And he takes the dam of the soyer and he's mazah the dam again at bein abad. And all the laws that we mentioned until now, requirements for hazos hapar apply to hazos hasoyer as well. Now, he finished the hazos hasoyer bein abadim, and the Kohen Gadol is now standing in the heichal lifnim mimizbeach hapnimi. Right, there was a mizbeach in the heichal. We call it the mizbeach hazor, and he's beyond the mizbeach hazor. Now, umaze midam hapar beheichal keneged hakaporos b'mokom shekeneged bein habad. In other words, he's not finished with the dama par. I mean, he did all the azos of the dama par. He did all the azos of the soyer, and all this was done bein abadim. Now the Kohen Gadol finds himself in the heichal. He's no longer in the Kodesh Kodshim. And once again, he's going to do hazah, a second round of hazah, with regard to the dam of the par in the heichal. Now we're in the heichal. Achas l'mala v'sheva l'mata. Once again, Gamona b'piv, k'mo hazos b'fnim. So we have the hazos in the Kodesh Kodshim. Now we have a duplicate set of hazos of the dama par in the heichal. Just he's on the other side of the parochas. And once again, achas l'mal, achas l'mal. B'fiv, and that's based on the pasuk v'chein yaseh li'ol moed, meaning in the heichal he should do exactly what he did in the Fnim, in the Kodesh Kadosh. Akach, after that, Maza Midam HaSoyer in Eged HaParochos. Once again, as we said before, with regard to the Hazos inside the Kodesh Kadoshim, it does not have to reach the Kaporis itself. Here, in the case of the Hazos in the Heichal, when we say the Hazos are Biparochas, it doesn't mean that it has to reach the Parochas, but rather the Avir of the Parochas, and the dam would fall on the ground. Okay, he did the Hazah, and both sets of Hazah, the Par and the Soyer, Bifnim, and now Bachutz, in the Heichal, so to speak, Bachutz. Achar shehizo midam asor keneged haparochas, vayamara es dam hapar l'toch dam hasoyer. He would take the dam of the par, pour it into the dam of the soyer. V'chozer uma'are dam hataroves l'toch hakli harek shel dam hapar. Vayayotze min hazbeach ulefnim el tzido hamizrachi shel hamizbeach v'tovel etzvo v'dam umaza arba hazos al arba kronos hamizbeach. Moshe Nemar v'yatza el hamizbeach asher lifnei Hashem v'chiper olav v'lakach midam apar u'midam asor v'nosan al karnos hamizbeach saviv. So now we're ready for the Kronos HaMizbeach. We're talking about the four Hazos on the four corners of the top, the Gag of the Mizbeach, respectively. Now, would he begin these Hazos of the four Kronos with the Keren Mizrachis of the Mizbeach? No. Would he begin with the Keren Maravis of the Mizbeach? No. So he says the following. The Pasuk says, V'yotza el ha-Mizbeach. And the Gemara darshans ad nafik mikule Mizbeach. In other words, the western side of the Mizbeach was very close to the Kodesh Kadosh. As we've said a million times, you enter into the Mikdash from the east, and you go west towards the Kodesh Kadosh. And here it says, the Yotza min ha-Mizbeach. So that the western side of the Mizbeach is not considered Yotza, because I did nothing mikuli Mizbeach. He's too close to the Kodesh Kadosh. And therefore, instead of going to the western side of the Mizbeach, he goes to the eastern side of the Mizbeach. Okay. So this is where we're up to here. If you want to make a note of it, it's on the third paragraph on page Zion. That starts with the words L'divrei Hakol. And Amir Hashem will continue this tomorrow.